Okay, welcome. Today I'm joined by Denny Bohs, a product strategist who spent decades helping founders bring ideas to life, navigating growth and building and helping to avoid building the wrong thing, right? Denny's career spans early stage startups, rapid scale environments, enterprise SaaS and advisory work, and with non-technical founders. What stands out with Denny is that he's lived on both sides. He's scaling companies and building his own consulting practice along the way. And Denny, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Excellent, excellent. So, Denny, let's talk about you. Can you walk us through your journey and how you found your way into startup and product strategy work?
Yeah, it's not something I set out to do. Way back when I went to school and I got a degree in marketing and economics, and I spent about 6 years in the financial services world, mutual funds and different things. And I happened to know a couple of guys who were creating a business. And the one partner knew that I wasn't entirely satisfied with my current role and career, that financial services just wasn't quite doing it for me. And so we sat down and talked, and he invited me eventually to join him. And I remember distinctly him telling me all about these technical things they were doing and what they were going to build and all this stuff. And this was back in late 1999, if you can think back that far. And when he got done, I remember looking at him and saying, I don't understand half of what you said, and I don't know how I can help. And what he said to me was, don't worry about that. I'll teach you. And so I
There you go.
talked it over with my wife, and we decided to take the jump. And I joined this company. It was a startup. I was the employee number one. We had two partners, and there was a third guy who was a minority partner, and he was a developer, and then me. And I remember my first job when I got there was to show up in the morning at 5 a.m., sit in front of a screen and look at our production server. And they said, if you see this, this, or this, call me. And so I was looking for errors if we were going to run. We were running very lean then. And then over time, I was able to learn, led our support team, and then I led our implementation team, and I built those teams out. And then over time, eventually, same sort of thing with product. I was doing my thing. I was kind of a special consultant handling special projects and all. And they had a product manager who left, and they said, would you fill in until we find someone else? I said, sure. And then I ended up being that someone else. I thought it was kind of fun. And they said, well, you're doing a good job. And I got some training, and that kind of set me on my path in my career in software product management. I mean, that was really, I think, 2011 when that part happened. So I've been kind of in one way or another working in software product and project management ever since.
Great story, Denny. I like it. And so what patterns did you start noticing across different companies as you gained experience?
Yeah, one thing that I noticed I learned this over time because I had the unfortunate circumstance for working for a lot of companies for a short period of time for a period there. It seemed like I would join a company, and then 6 months later they would lay off a third of the company, or the company would be sold, or something else would happen. So I couldn't seem to be in one place very long. And that actually was one thing that got me over my fear of contracting. I always thought, well, contracts, they could go away, and then I began to realize, so do full-time jobs. They go away too. And so I started doing my contracting. That actually started full-time. I think I kind of started doing a little bit with it around 2016, but started doing it full-time in, I believe it was 2018 or 2019. And one of the things that I really noticed over time was everyone defines these terms differently. You can go and get training in product management, and you can kind of get a clear picture. But when you go out in the real world, you're working for this company, and they say, we're going to hire a product manager. And over time, I began to realize the first question I have to ask is say, well, when you say product manager, what do you mean? And it was really different everywhere I was working. And so when I picked up contracts, a lot of times they would say product manager, but what they would mean is scrum master, product manager, project manager, all of those things together in some combination, and business analyst. And so for me, I didn't much care one way or the other. I would just kind of find out, well, what are you looking for? and then try to find what we needed and fill the role for them. But defining terms became very important for me early on because you'd hate to go into a job thinking you're hiring me to be a product manager. So I start behaving like a product manager, and then you say, this isn't working out. So I learned to define those terms early on.
And that's so important. It's the frame of reference that your customer or who's hiring you in their mind, what they're thinking. And you've mentioned relationships being central throughout your career. Why do you think that's been such a consistent theme?
Well, one of the things that I learned early on from, again, this was the other founder that from this company that I started with, 26 years ago. There was one guy who was he was more of the technical guy, and the other guy was the sales and marketing guru. And one of the things that he taught me early on was in terms of people, when people use the term manager and they get to a point where they're leading people and they just say, well, I'm a manager now, and they get a little bit of power. And I've seen so many people, they have a thimble full of authority and they get drunk on that. And the next thing you know, disaster happens. But he made it very clear to me that, you got to remember these are people. Number one, you don't just treat everybody the same. You treat them fairly, but that doesn't mean you treat everybody the same. You got to get to know people and understand who they are, what their strengths are. And so he said to me, you manage things, but you lead people. And that kind of bled over into relationships as well. And one of the things, even from a product manager side, one of the biggest things you do when you're trying to understand what you're building and maybe doing user interviews is a lot of listening. One of the things I learned early on was you ask open-ended questions and then you just be quiet. And sometimes there's an awkward silence and you let the other person talk. And so as a product manager, one of the biggest skills that you need to have is the ability to listen. Not just hear what people say, but to listen. And so that's a difficult thing. And I struggled with that early on because so many times we're having a conversation and you hear like a key thing in the conversation and you're already planning what you're going to say next. And when you're doing that, you're not listening to what else they're saying. And so for me, I've learned to try and be a good listener if I can. And then just with relationships in general, if you treat people right, they're going to stick around long. And that's kind of just a principle that I've learned in business in general, right? If you just try to make a quick buck on somebody and, do something where you're going to make a little bit of money and you're going to treat the other person maybe not the greatest, they're not going to come back. And so I'd rather not make quite as much money on something maybe and develop the relationships because, you develop those long term and you never know when they may come back. And I could share a lot of stories of people that I've talked to and in some cases even forgotten about, but have heard back from them a year or two later. And like, oh yeah, I remember we talked, sure. And then, there's a new business proposal that someone wants or someone needs. So those relationships are, it's good for business, but it's also just kind of, if you want to be a good kind of person, and you want to be able to develop relationships and make your life a little bit easier, just treat people well, treat them the way you want to be treated.
Great. Thanks, Denny. Great explanation. And we talked last week and you shared a great analogy of staying calm while everything feels chaotic. And why is that so important in startups?
Well, startups are full of chaos. You mentioned that I've kind of started my own consulting practice. It's not quite the same as building a startup company like, some Netflix that blows up or something like that. But anytime you're starting something new, there's going to be chaos. You just don't know what's going to happen. You think you do, and you can map it out and you can plan. I think it was Mike Tyson that said everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. When you're doing these things come out of nowhere, out of corners that you don't realize. And stuff starts to happen and you have to stay calm because especially if you have other people that you're working with, whether you're the leader or whether you're just, working with them in general as a contractor, whatever it is, if you start to panic, people tend to look around and they think, well, if this guy's panicking, things must be going wrong. And, then they start to panic and then it spreads like a disease. I think I was telling you that I like to read historical fiction and I especially like old British naval kind of fiction. It's fun. I've got a few authors I like to read, but there's always this picture of the stoic captain in the middle of in the 1700s or something. These two big ship lines are just trading cannon fire and, wood splinters and cannonballs are flying everywhere. and the captain's just kind of standing on deck with his hands behind his back, calmly walking around, issuing orders. And, there's always one part of the book where he has a junior officer who starts to hurry too much and he says, walk, and they want to stay calm because they want their men and their crew to see captain's not worried at all. And so it really does when you kind of translate that to business and to startups and projects that are prone to chaos and unknowns. If you can stay calm in the middle of that and you say, well, we've got something here we've got to figure out, especially even if, say, one of the folks on the team makes a big mistake and it blows up. We're people, we make mistakes. So if you can stay calm with all of that instead of reaming someone out, that sets the tone for how this is going to go. And that also, again, that comes back to relationships again. People want to work in an environment like that. I want to work for people like that. I've had bosses who would just freak out and start screaming and yelling at people, and they're the ones that people tend to want to get away from. But the ones who can stay calm and say, right, well, we're going to have to deal with this, but let's stay calm. Let's look at what we need to do and get it done. And you're kind of the voice of calm in the middle of the chaos. People will want to stay and work for that, and that's it's a tough thing to do. I've failed at it many, many times, but it is definitely a very valuable skill set to work on.
Yes, thank you. So let's look at this. So what mistakes do you see non-technical founders repeat most often?
Not being prepared, not researching. Going out and thinking just because you have an idea that it's going to work, that you like it, that it's going to work for everyone else and everyone's going to like it and just come to your door begging you to have it. I've worked on a few projects. I had one project in the real estate sector, 3 guys who were real estate investors. One guy owned a couple of apartment buildings. Another guy, I think he owned like 1 or 2 properties. Another guy was just starting out. And they were all investors in real estate, and they wanted to build a piece of software in a marketplace where renters and landlords could get together and, you could advertise your property and all these different things. But I began to realize once we got further along in this project, they had no plan for how to actually market and sell it. And they assumed that once we were done with the first release and we put it out there, that money was just going to roll into their doors. The other thing is they did not understand the effort and the level of effort involved in building these things. Sometimes whenever you're talking with software developers and people who know what they're doing to build this, and you use the word just, it's just this, or it's only that. It kind of tips off that you don't really understand what's involved behind the scenes to make that little thing work the way you want it to. And so you have to understand that whatever you think the effort's going to be, it's going to be much bigger. And so there's I've worked on a lot of projects where I've had to kind of educate people and say, all right, well, it's going to take a little longer than you think. And the other thing is planning ahead of time. You have to plan out. I think I've developed a skill over the years where I can kind of sit as a translator between technical and non-technical people. And I find sometimes the easiest way is using metaphors that people are familiar with. So I recently had a project and a guy just wanted to go build something, just get out there and get after it. I want to see activity. I want to see something happening. And it's like, all right, well, we can just go throw something together, not knowing what it is, and then you're going to be unhappy with it. Or we can take the time to understand what is it you want to do, validate it in the market, and make sure that it's actually something that people want and that they'll actually want to pay for and use. There's a group in product management, Pragmatic Institute. They do a lot of great training of product managers and things. They have a saying that they're fond of, and that is that your opinion, however interesting, is irrelevant. What matters is what does the market say. You're not buying your own product, right? So if you think it's great and you're the only one, someone's going to have to tell you your baby's ugly and you're not going to like that. But you have to go to the market and make sure that people want to do that they're going to want this, that it's not going to end up being what's often called a solution in search of a problem.
So you use the phrase activity versus progress. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. This one project that I was working on fairly recently, they had really one investor behind this. And I don't know if that investor was putting pressure on the business folks or what, but they wanted to see something. And so I throw a lot of quotes out, but again, I've heard that this was from Abraham Lincoln. I don't know if it really is or not, but He said if I had someone, if it wasn't him, said if I had 8 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend the first six sharpening my axe. And there's not a lot of activity there, right? So if you imagine that scene, you're going to cut this tree down. And the guy who's hiring you to do it is sitting in the window in the house watching you, and you're just there on the stone sharpening your axe, and he's like, "What is this guy doing?" It's like, spend 6 hours. When is something going to happen here? They want to see. They'd rather see you take a blunt instrument and just beat on the tree than to do that. But the difference is if you're just going to go all willy-nilly and start into things, you could cut that tree down and might fall the wrong way and crush the house.
Hmm.
You might splinter the thing all over the place, or, who knows what could happen. And it's the same in software. When you're building, whether it's a mobile app, a web app, whatever it is, you have to understand what it is you're building, because doing a rewrite and recreating these things and refactoring is often a phrase you'll hear is very expensive. And so a lot of times people, they get nervous because like they're not doing anything. We hired this team and here they are. I haven't seen anything yet. There's nothing I can look at. Well, there's a lot of market research, a lot of things that have to happen, a lot of strategy, a lot of planning to make sure. If you want to I had the guy say, well, we're going to need some of these things, just build that part. I'm like, all right, well, we know we're going to build a house and I can pour the foundation. But how do I know if you want a 4-bedroom house or a 2-bedroom house? How do I know, all these different things? So, you wouldn't build a house. An architect and a designer, they wouldn't build a house without blueprints. And so you have to understand that there's a lot of planning and research that goes into these things. Then you can actually build something, and it'll go much quicker once you know what you're building and why and who you're building it for. So taking the time to create things like personas and user journeys and actually doing interviews with people to understand what is it that you want in this. If you're going to build this, if you were going to have this, what would you like? If you're using something similar today, what do you not like or like about it? What are the things you would change if you could? All those kinds of things so that you can build something that, people would actually want to use. And once you do some of those things and you have that data and you know who you're building it for, you know what you're building, you know what problem you're solving, then you can start to actually build things, and that progress will go quickly from there. But that first initial stage is a lot of planning and research, and it doesn't have tangible results that people who are non-technical can grab onto and see clearly. So they get nervous sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. So we talked a lot about founders scaling their companies. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how you've approached scaling at your work briefly. What parts of growing your business feels the easiest and what feels the hardest?
Well, for me, honestly, almost all of it feels the hardest because if you're in my role, as a freelancer, I'm essentially a one-man show. And then I often will go and hire, I'll bring in other folks as contractors to be part of a project, but I'm kind of selling myself to people, and I'm terrible at that. I don't know. I don't like doing that. It's the same thing whenever someone has to write a resume or do an interview and they ask you, tell me about yourself and what do you do good and what are you best at? And I don't know. For me, I'd rather just look at what I do, just let my work or whatever it is speak for itself. But, you have to be able to sell yourself. And that's a struggle for me. I'm still terrible at it. And so one of the things that I did when I first got started with my contracting and consulting business was I got a job initially from a marketplace. So there's some marketplaces out there that, you know, um, folks who are looking to build, a project or a software or, change, manage, whatever it is. They're looking for resources. They'll post it out on these forums and these marketplaces. And so I got my first few jobs that way. And I thought, well, this will be easy. I'll just keep doing this. Got a
Hmm.
marketplace here. I'll just keep doing that. And it worked for about, I want to say maybe 2, 3 years. And then a lot of things changed. It became some of these marketplaces would advertise, we only have the top X% of people here. So we have a limited pool of resources, but they're the best at what they do. And I guess something changed in their strategy and they started letting anyone and everyone in. And so initially, whereas I had to go in and be certified and take tests and prove these things, now the marketplace was just flooded with other consultants and people.
Mm.
And so what happened is, and it was all over the world. So something might get posted. This happened to me several times. I'm like, oh, there's an interesting job or project. Let me take a look at that. It was posted 2 hours ago, and there's already people interviewing and being sent there because, everybody's awake all around the world, and these things were happening. So it became incredibly competitive, and the kind of thing where you almost had to spend a full-time job just looking for these things and finding these contracts and going out there. So that got difficult. I sort of expanded, and I looked at a few other marketplaces, and I picked up a little bit of work. And then I started to just talk to colleagues and people I've worked with in the past and have done a little bit of work that way. It hasn't been something that I can say, well, I've got a good pipeline and consistent work coming in. Now, that said, I recently talked to a fella who I talked to a lot of different people, and I wasted some money on some of these other things, right? People would say, I can come in and get you set up, and, we'll go out and find roles and do all these things. And then I get, 3 months into it, and I find out you guys aren't really doing anything. And I spent this money and I've got nothing to show for it. And so I kind of gave up on all of those things because I found, I've tried this once or twice, maybe 3 times, and I've had bad experiences. So I've kind of just pushed all that aside. I did recently find another guy, though, who we've been talking, and I think he may have a good strategy. He's got some interesting ways of going about this. And he's kind of, we talked a little bit about relationships. He's kind of the same mind, and he's like, look, I'm looking to build long-term network and work with people. And so even if I lose a little money up front and we do some things, because I was sharing with him my experiences, it's like we could do that and then maybe see what happens down the road. So I'm looking to try and, get specific about how I'm branding myself and my company and what we want to do, a more targeted approach rather than hey, I can do products for anybody. It's kind of broad. And so I'm looking at more of a targeted approach, maybe a slight rebranding of some things, and then work on with this other gentleman I mentioned who's got a good strategy for really going after targeted folks like this. And I'm still leaning heavily on people I know at colleagues. And so I've got a few things that I'm currently working on from people I've worked with in the past, but it is very difficult. People who can scale a business they're hard to find. And when you can find someone who can do it well, you need to grab onto them and not let them go.
Mhm.
It's not something I've been very good at myself. So I kind of struggle with, in my role, I have to focus on doing the contracts and the work that I'm focused on, but I've also got to have an eye on what's going to be next. And, this contract isn't going to last forever. So got to have something in the pipeline and what's coming down next. And those are the things that I struggle with. So, it's,
And I don't think it's just something you're experiencing. I think it's something that across the industry people are struggling with. And it's definitely, there's an art to it, right? And so, how do you see what kind of work you're doing evolving over the next few years, or do you see it evolving?
I do. I know everybody's talking about AI, right? You hear just AI everywhere. In fact, I had a project recently and the guy just said, we need to put AI in this. And I and another fellow that I was working with on the project were going, well, what do you need it to do? Where should we put it? What are you thinking? And it was just, we need AI. It's kind of like one of those things. Everyone's got AI, so we need AI. So I do think, obviously the AI stuff isn't going to go away. I do think it'll be like a lot of things where it's kind of it'll plateau and then maybe come down a little bit just because right now people are looking at it for everything. Like I've heard about an actress somewhere in Europe who, even won some, I don't know what award it was, some award for acting, and then you come to find out it was complete AI creation. The woman doesn't exist. So there's a lot of stuff with, video and digital creations, and just in a lot of different ways. A lot of times very useful. So one of the things that I've done is I've actually recently joined a group that LaRoche University as on the advisory board for an AI program that they have there. Partially because I want to educate myself a little bit more. I need to learn more about how to incorporate AI into things. And I think everybody's aware of ChatGPT and we can do simple things with that.
Yes.
But I need to expand my skill set and knowledge. And so I think hopefully that'll help with that. And then also build some relationships and networking there and help to kind of create and craft some things in terms of the way it's going to go. I don't think there's going to be much software built um, in the near future that's not going to be, at least in some way, partially built with AI and with AI features involved. So there's going to have to be, you're going to have
Okay.
to get on board with that. You can't You can't fight it. There's going to have to be something there. It's not going away.
I think you're right, Denny. And so what kind of client do you most enjoy working with today?
I really love the startup and small business groups.
Okay.
I mean, we've worked with large companies. You can even see on my website some of the clients that I've worked with. I've worked with the federal government on contracts. I've worked with, Calm, the app that's out there with, all that people know about. I worked with large insurance companies and health tech and all that sort of thing. But what I love the most is startups and small companies. And that's largely because of the mindset and the way things are done. So fewer levels of bureaucracy and regulation to cut through when you're talking about, we have an idea, we're a small group, we're motivated, and we want to move. You can get the pace is a little faster. People don't have time for egos if they're doing it right. They just want to get things done. They don't care if the idea comes from the newest guy on the team or the top. If it's a good idea and we're going to go with it, then we need to just move. And so I love those kinds of teams who can, be a little bit cross-functional, who can work well together and who are able, and this is tough for a lot of people, and it's, set the egos aside.
Mm.
I've worked with I remember working with a client one time. They had 5 people in this company. 4 of them were vice presidents or higher. They all had to have a big fancy title. Now, it actually ended up working out for them when they were acquired later on. But part of it was they got titles instead of raises, and people wanted that. But there was a lot of ego involved. I'm the vice president of this and the vice president of that and everything else. Titles are useful to me sometimes, in my opinion, when you're working with people outside the organization, because they need to know kind of who you are and what you do. Inside the organization, I think it's just comes back to relationships. And if there's clear lines of who's doing what, cross-functional. I mean, I've worked at some of the places I've loved the most. I've had a guy report to me on one project and I've reported to him on others, and we worked well together and we just go do things. And that's what I really love. So that small business, that startup atmosphere is what I really enjoy and love the most.
Okay. That makes sense. I like that. And Denny, this was an incredible conversation. I appreciate your candidness, your insight, and thank you. So what I want to do is how should our listeners reach out to you if they would like to engage with you?
Well, the best way is just through my website. It's nice because it's real short. My name and my company is my last name, Bohs, Bohs. And the website and when you're on there, you can get a little bit of an idea of some things I've done. And there's a way to contact me and set up a meeting right there. And I'd love to, hear about ideas and needs that people have and see how we can work together. The way I tend to work, I have a network of solid developers and designers and folks that I've worked with over the years. And so we often will, you know, one of us has a project and a need, we'll reach out to each other and pull each other in. So that's kind of how I tend to do things where we need it. But yeah, I'd love to have folks just come to my website and set up a time.
Okay, excellent. So Denny, again, and thank you again for sharing both those lessons and realities of scaling products and businesses. And I think our audience, thank
Oh, it
you.
was my pleasure. Yeah, I appreciate it, Mark. It was fun talking. I really enjoyed it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right.